So I read this book called Longitude, which is about how sailors in the ancient old times tried calculating longitude. And it's filled with some pretty ridiculous things they tried. I thought that was really funny, and that's what this video is about. But imagine if you were stuck on a sailing ship in the 1600s and you had to figure out where you are. What would you do? Well, to figure out how far north or south you are, you simply look at how high the sun is at the highest point during the day. And you're done, you have your latitude. But how do you figure out your longitude? Maybe you can wait for nighttime and wait for the stars to come up? That won't work, because the stars you see now will be identical to the stars someone else can see just a bit further west and a slightly different time. So for a long time, sailors used unreliable methods such as dead reckoning to figure out their longitude. Crossing the ocean like this was bound to cause a few tragedies. In one instance, the British Navy would seize a Portuguese ship with so much treasure they nearly doubled the national treasury. While in another, ships would run aground and 2,000 sailors would lose their lives. This was a costly problem, and in 1714, the British Parliament set a prize fund for anyone who could calculate longitude accurately, worth more than £3 million in today's money. Right away, the submissions started pouring in. The commissioners had to spend a lot of their time reviewing perpetual motion machines with plausible-sounding pseudoscience. Some suggestions were just plain silly as well. For example, there was the powder of sympathy. Let's say you got injured by a knife. This powder would heal you, but you apply the powder to the knife, not yourself. That way, a person could be healed remotely, but more importantly, applying it to the weapon made the victim feel a bit of pain. So, what you do is, you injure a poor dog with a knife, leave the knife in London, put the dog on a ship, and then each day at noon, apply the powder to the knife. The dog would yelp in pain, and the sailors would know it's noon. Problems? Well, some dogs would yelp a lot during the day anyway, and also it was pseudoscience. Not all suggestions were completely crazy. Someone proposed using eclipses. It's true, it could work. A sun or moon eclipse happens at a known time, so that could act as a clock from which you can determine longitude. The problem is obvious though, isn't it? Eclipses happen way too rarely. Alright, moving on. So how about this? Since the magnetic north doesn't perfectly align with true north, by looking at the distance between them, you could know your longitude. So you get a really good compass and compare the north it's showing to where the North Star is. By measuring the angle, you know your longitude, right? Close but no cigar. It turned out that the Earth's magnetic field is not very reliable, and the small variations around the globe would make navigating like this fairly imprecise. One of the best ideas came from Galileo. He figured out that the moons of Jupiter become visible at regular intervals and could be used as a clock in the sky. However, using a telescope on a swaying ship is tough. So he glued the telescope to a helmet. It might look silly, but at least that way it would always stay attached. Problems? The person wearing it would have to be very good at keeping balance in rough seas. Whereas the telescope was so sensitive that even on land, the heartbeats of the wearer would cause the image to shake. Also, Jupiter isn't always visible. Okay, so how about this? You send a string of ships to the ocean, each 600 miles from the last, and they lay anchor in the middle of the ocean. Then, at precise times, the people on land would fire a cannon up into the sky and make some fireworks. The first ship nearest to land would see it and do the same. Then, the second ship would do the same, and so on down the long chain across the ocean. That way, ships at sea could see those signals and know the exact time from which they would know their longitude. Problems? The ocean is much deeper than they thought, and the amount of chain needed to anchor a ship in deep ocean is enormous. Besides, keeping all those sailors out at sea would be crazy and also expensive. Moving on. You'll notice that some suggestions focus on the ship knowing the exact time. This is because with exact time, you can tell your longitude by looking at the sky. Pendulum clocks were accurate and they worked on land, but put them on a swaying ship where the pendulum can extend and shorten based on temperature, and they fail instantly. Jeremy Thacker tried placing a clock on gimbals to combat the ship swaying, but that didn't completely fix it, and the changes in temperature was still a problem since they affected precise size of metal parts, which affected clock accuracy. That is, until John Harrison invented a metal strip with two different metals on each side which would contract and expand based on temperature, and thus speed up or slowed the clock down. This could counter the effects of temperature changes and make Harrison the frontrunner in clockmaking. However, when he submitted his clock to the board, the lead commissioner Neville Maskelyne didn't really like it. Harrison accused him of abusing the clock called H4, which took almost 30 years to develop, damaging it on purpose and using flawed logic to evaluate it. The board even refused to return the clock to Harrison after the test, but instead made a copy of it and gave it to Captain James Cook. He used it to travel around the globe and it worked really well. Here's a weird side note. That clock mysteriously stopped working at the exact moment James Cook died while fighting in Hawaii. Unsatisfied that he isn't getting the Longitude prize, Harrison went directly to the king to complain. This worked and he was awarded part of the prize. Later, it turned out that Maskelyne was working on a method he believed would work better than clocks, and this might have been the reason he didn't like Harrison very much. This was the lunar distance method, where by looking at the position of the moon relative to the stars that surround it, you could tell the time. This is because the moon has a predictable orbit and thus a position at any given time. The height of the moon above the horizon would be measured just like that of the sun with an octant. This is done by looking at the horizon through an eyepiece and moving a mirror above until it would show the reflection of the moon on the horizon. The moving part would also indicate the angle. Working on the lunar distance method required a lot of astronomical data, which meant writing down where all the stars are and how the moon moves and wobbles around the Earth and so on. Tobias Mayer did a lot of work there. In the end, the lunar distance method was used by most ships simply because manufacturing the clocks was super expensive. It wasn't an ideal method because sometimes the moon isn't visible or it's too close to the sun, but it was better than nothing. Later on, as clockmaking technology improved and clocks became cheaper, they became more ubiquitous on ships. Using clocks to determine longitude lasted all the way until the early 1900s when radio time signals started being introduced. Well, you made it all the way to the end of the video. Well, thank you so much. If you liked the video, I don't know unless you press the button, so that would be really good. It's one of my first videos on YouTube. I don't know what anybody likes. I'm just guessing. People want to subscribe. I hope they press the button as well. It's really weird putting out, the first ever videos on YouTube. So, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.